Hello, everyone, and welcome into a special presentation today. DawgNation is here talking the latest with spring practice. My name is Connor Riley. I am joined here by Mike Griffith. The Georgia Bulldogs are through their first four spring practices. They had one yesterday in pads for the last two, and I will give the floor to you, Mr. Mike Griffith. What have been your early impressions of this 2023 Georgia football team as we have seen them now play in four spring practices?
Well, Connor, I think you'd agree they passed the eye test. You're missing a guy like Darnell Washington, and yeah, he was, freakishly big and stood out. And certainly we got used to seeing Jalen Carter over there in the middle of the defensive line. But some of these newcomers, particularly in the linebacking core, have just knocked me back. Uh, I think Dominic Lovett, the receiver, has kind of jumped out at me. I have some questions about Thomas. Maybe not everything I expected. I heard Kirby on the microphone yesterday getting on him a little bit. We know he had the off-field issues. It's been very hard to get much of a read on the quarterbacks, but I will say this. They all look automatic throwing the football. What we've seen, routes on air, nobody's throwing the ball into the dirt, right? Nobody's making bad throws. Everybody looks pretty automatic so far. We haven't seen him play a whole lot of football. But to my experience, listening to the guys talk, watching them on the field, this is a plugged-in football team, Connor, and I don't have any reason to doubt their preseason number one ranking. Obviously, there's a lot of trials and tribulations ahead, but to me, right now, all systems go.
Yeah, I think those are all fair points there. I think when you look at this team, again, they have 18 early enrollees, three transfer players. You mentioned Lovett, Thomas from Mississippi State, and then Smoke Bowie from Texas A&M there. Well, yes, they don't have to replace as much as they did a year ago. I think with some of the losses that they've experienced, All-American Chris Smith, All-American Jalen Carter, Darnell Washington, who fundamentally changed the way that Georgia played offense because of the way they were allowed to use him thanks to his blocking abilities there. This team in this upcoming season is going to be different for a number of different reasons. You have Mike Bobo back out there leading the offense and being the offensive coordinator for this team. We got a chance to talk to Brock Bowers yesterday. It's going to be an offense that is probably a bit more predicated on the strength of this wide receiver room and what we ultimately see out of that. They bring back Lad McConkey. I think Dominic Lovett's going to be a very good player for this team. And then you have veterans like Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, Arian Smith, who are capable of making big plays when called upon. This is an offense that I think whoever ultimately ends up winning the quarterback battle, whether it be Carson Beck, Brock Vandegrift, and as Kirby Smart would say, I would not count on Gunnar Stockton yet. Whoever ends up winning this, they're going to have plenty of weapons around him. The offensive line, I expect to be one of the best in college football this year. They bring back essentially four starters from the national championship game last season. Kendall Milton, I think, is going to be a very productive player if he is able to remain healthy, and they have good depth in that running back room. And so, well, yes, there's newness at the top with this Georgia offense, and maybe this is a good segue into the quarterback position. Whoever ultimately ends up winning it, I think they're going to have all the tools around them to be a successful player in this Georgia offense.
Yeah, I posted a story this morning, Connor. Of course, the regular viewers of DawgNation Daily and Brandon Off Today, as our viewers have noted, probably saw Jake Fromm a bit ago break down these quarterbacks. I basically, wrote out what Jake said. And I think Jake's conclusion is in line with something you and I have been saying all along. I don't think any of these quarterbacks are a bad answer. The question is, what's the question? We're trying to figure out what the offense is going to be and what Mike Bowe determines the offense to be. Then you pick the quarterback that's best suited. This kind of reminds me of the JT Daniels, Stetson Bennett 2021. Kirby Smart's looking out there and he says it's hard to run four receiver sets when you've only got five or six receivers. We're not going to run multi-receiver. They wanted a mobile quarterback, and they went to more of that double tight end formation. So what are we going to see this year? Right now, I think 11 personnel, which is three receivers, one tight end, one back. But then what do you do with it? As Jake said, you've got Brock Vandegrift, who he describes as a bigger, more athletic Stetson Bennett. You've got Carson Beck, and it's almost like you can see that blue trail, that blue streak coming off the ball when Carson throws it. So much velocity and depth. And then Gunnar, as Jake kind of compares himself, just the all-around guy that gets him in the right play. But what is Bobo going to want from the position, Connor? How many quarterback runs, how big of a part of the offense is that RPO package going to be versus a play-action deep ball, which we've also seen Georgia run under Kirby Smart?
Yeah, I think the big thing to keep in mind here, and Kirby's pointed this out, and I think it's a fair, thing to keep in mind. Well, yes, Carson Beck is not the athlete that Stetson Bennett is. He's also not a bad athlete. I think if you go back and watch games last year, he's able to maneuver well in the pocket. He had a big first down pickup in the Vanderbilt game, and yes, that's against backups. But the fact that you're showing that against backups, I think leads you to believe that you can possibly continue to do that. I'm not in any way comparing him to this, but I think from an athleticism standpoint, Beck's got a little bit of Joe Burrow in him in that he doesn't look overly athletic, but when he needs to turn it on and use his legs to move around and possibly even pick up a first down, he has the functional ability to do so. He played baseball before. He had a scholarship offer from the University of Florida to go play down there. So he is a more than capable athlete. As far as what they get out of this offense, I don't think again, part of how much they want quarterback run to factor into this offense, quite frankly, is going to factor into just how many quarterbacks they end up having on the roster. I think one of the things that looms over all this is, does a guy after spring practice sort of see the way this quarterback battle is going and decide he's going to transfer out and go elsewhere? I don't expect a quarterback to be named coming out of spring practice. Quite frankly, I don't expect one to be named coming out of fall camp either. I think Georgia's going to take this into the season, given they open up with games against UT Martin and Ball State the first 2 weeks. Georgia can afford to be patient with this quarterback battle. Wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if they take this into the regular season in games against South Carolina, even UAB before they go on the road against Auburn. I think you're allowed to sort of experiment and find what you have there. We saw against UAB in 2021, Georgia gave first team reps to both Stetson Bennett and Carson Beck in that game. Stetson Bennett handled it really well. Carson Beck didn't. And then when JT Daniels got hurt once again in the Vanderbilt game, they sort of went back to Stetson, and Stetson was able to take that and take this offense to where it ultimately ended up. And so it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest to see Georgia continue to drag this out and find out who can be the best guy, not just in a practice setting, but when the bullets are live, when the games really start to matter. Because once you have that sort of answer, then you can sort of take off. And by week 5, that game at Auburn is when Georgia probably needs to have this quarterback conundrum answered. And I expect Georgia and Kirby Smart to take that all the way up until then.
Yeah. It's funny, Connor. I look at some of the comments, and I know Mike Bobo brings back memories of yesteryear and jokes about fullbacks and I formations. And I just, going back and doing the research on that, I mean, that was the most prolific, highest scoring offense in Georgia history. But my goodness, if he didn't run the ball a ton with Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, and Todd Gurley, he probably should have been fired. If Georgia had those 3 running backs right now, they would be running the ball more than 50% of the time. So the Mike Bobo jokes, while kind of funny, are certainly misplaced, and it shows somewhat of a naivety of Mike's ability and in fact his charge to use the talent that they had. And that's where we kind of go back to, what does Georgia have this year and what will be their bread and butter? Darnell Washington was more than just a first-round talent at tight end. I mean, at 6'7", and I think he played at 275. I know he weighed in a little lighter for the combine, but he created another dimension with a guy who not just that could block okay, but destroy people as another offensive tackle. Georgia doesn't have another tight end. I don't know that college football has another tight end like that. So the people that are going, well, there's still a lot of good tight ends. Well, there are, but there are none like that. Oscar Delp is not that blocker. Is he adequate? Yes. Is he an advantage in a dual threat way? Perhaps no. And this is one of the things they have to decide. Do you want that slot receiver, Lovett, which it would appear to be Lovett at this point, who appears very dynamic, arguably?
I think Ladd has gotten first team reps at that slot position.
You think Ladd? Well, Ladd can play all 3, so perhaps
right.
They moved Lovett outside. I thought Ladd was going to stay out there at the Z, but I guess, again, this is what we're finding out. This is what they're going to evolve. They're going to try different guys in different places. I mean, my goodness, you remember Eric Gilbert came here and started out trying to play wide receiver the first few practices too. How'd that work out? So we'll have to wait and see how it evolves. But the bottom line is 3 wide receivers and 1 tight end give Georgia a better chance than 2 receivers and 2 tight end? And then one more element, Kenny McIntosh, he may not be a first-round pick, but he was the most versatile back of the Kirby Smart era. I know that Kendall can catch. I know that Dejon can catch. But can they catch like Kenny and James have in these last 2 tailback rotations?
And, using that to transition here to the running back room, we've gotten some questions online about who is going to be. Look, I know Dejon Edwards isn't flashy. He's probably going to lead the team in carries this season.
Hmm.
This is a guy they trust very well. They know what he is. They know what he brings to the table. He runs hard. I think the comparison to sort of if you're looking for the Georgia backfield this year, think back to that 2018 running back room where you had Elijah Holyfield and you had DeAndre Swift. Swift was sort of the home run hitter, finished with over 1,000 yards, and was one of the more explosive players in college football that year. I think Kendall Milton can be that for Georgia this season. He led the SEC at running backs last year in yards per carry. I think if he's able to stay healthy, he's absolutely a guy that can make big plays for this offense. Whereas Edwards sort of fills more that Elijah Holyfield role in terms of the guy that finishes the game 16, 17 carries, might only have 80 yards, might not be hyper efficient, but is a guy that gets better over the course of the game and is going to wear down opposing defenses. I think it'll be interesting to see how Branson Robinson gets into the mix there because he has a lot of traits that are obviously impressive and he looked good in limited ability last year. But he has a lot of overlap with Daijun Edwards, and I just think that Daijun Edwards is farther ahead of him right now in terms of where he is as a player. So it'll be interesting to see his development there. On the defensive side of the ball, Mike, what has caught your eye so far in terms of what you've seen from these guys and what you've seen from this defense? Because it does look, maybe not structurally, but with all the coaching staff coming back, this defense, in my opinion, does look a little different than what we have seen from some of the past iterations.
Well, the linebackers, again, not just the starters, but the backup. I mean, the depth and the athleticism there is, to me, the best. It looks like the deepest it's been. And that's big words, obviously. There was a year when they were backed up at outside linebacker. I kind of consider that outside linebacker more of a defensive lineman. I know Kirby said that as well, that Nolan Smith rush edge or Azeez Ojulari. I almost consider that more part of the defensive line. But yet still those inside backers look fantastic to me. Smile Munden and Jamon Dumas-Johnson may be the best inside linebacking duo in the country. I think JDJ is special. We've talked about his off-field issues. He's got to overcome those. That's one of the storylines of this offseason is this is a program that's seeking to reestablish its identity in a way that, Kirby Smart would prefer. You hear a lot of guys talking about playing for the G and what it means to them and rededicating themselves to those standards on and off the field. And to me, JDJ is a pivotal piece of this offseason puzzle to get this team back where it needs to be from a psychological standpoint. I think that's as big as anything on the field. How do they lead? How do they represent? And so far, all the signs are great. So those are very important elements. I was impressed with Kamari Lassiter last night. I think he strikes me as a very strong young leader. Obviously, Malachi Starks had a dynamic freshman season. Could Aguero be just as successful? Will he be the guy that lines up next to him? I was watching him, and again, it was just kind of a hit rap drill. It wasn't full-fledged football. But Connor, he really moves fast and aggressive, and he looks to be everything that Jeff Sentell told us that he would be at the safety position.
Yeah, hot take. Malachi Starks is going to be a good football player. I think the one thing on this defense that has caught my eye so far, when you look at that outside linebacker position, they're really, really young there. Other than Chaz Chandler, nobody has played significant snaps there. And we got out there at practice yesterday. Darius Smith was not with that position group, dealing with a little bit of an injury right now. We don't know what that is, but we'll expect to find that out in the coming days. I don't think it's serious or significant. We did see him out at practice, but he was not with his position group. And when you remove him, you've got a guy like CJ Madden who redshirted and didn't play much last year. And then you've got three freshmen in Sam Mpemba, Gabe Harris, and Damon Wilson who have literally never played college football. And while, yes, they're all talented and the outside linebacker room as a whole has gotten noticeably bigger with those additions, you're going to be putting those guys into situations that they haven't been before. And sometimes those work out well. You think Jalen Walker last year in the Ohio State game and the TCU game when he was able to come in and provide pressure off the edge there. But then you can look at, say, Brenton Cox in that 2018 SEC championship game when he got thrust into the fourth quarter there and quite frankly didn't play very well and was a big reason why Alabama was able to come back and win that game. When you're young at that outside linebacker position, especially with the way that Georgia asked them to play, they very rarely does Georgia ask its outside linebackers, if ever, just say, hey, pin your ears back, go get the quarterback. They ask their outside linebackers to do a lot of different things. That's why traditionally you haven't seen a freshman come in and play a hugely significant role in that. I think with the way this room is stacked up right now, and yes, they're going to get Marvin Jones Jr. and Jalen Walker both back from injury, but they're going to be asking a lot from those freshmen, Wilson, Harris, and Mpemba, and they're going to have to make up that ground quickly. A fun little anecdote from yesterday. IMG Academy has produced a ton of great players, Nolan Smith, Dalen Everett, Warren Brinson, Isaac Nada, a ton of guys that have come to Georgia and had a ton of success there. And they had some coaches at practice yesterday, and Chidera Uzodiribe was working through drills, and both Impemba and Gabe Harris both played at IMG. And Pablo was finishing out a drill. Uzodiribe didn't like his effort there and said, that's an IMG Academy effort right there. And so I think, there is a big difference. While IMG Academy has produced a lot of great football players and probably is the top school in terms of producing ready-made Division I football players, there's a big difference between what Georgia is asking for and what they were giving at the IMG Academy level. And so how quickly those guys get up to speed, I think, is going to be very important for this Georgia defense in 2023.
Yeah, and that's where that internal leadership kicks in. I mean, the coaches can coach and they can stand over and hover over them, but it's different when a guy like Jamon Dumas Johnson singles the young guy out after practice and says, look, right? I think every great team, I think every championship team I've covered has had that catalyst from within. And that's why I go back to JDJ. I just think he's that guy. I think Jordan Davis was that guy. I think Nolan Smith was that guy. I think Chris Smith was that guy. And to your point, a lot of this growth needs to transpire. And there's only so much that the coaches can do because they have limited amount of time with them every week. It's the guys that live with them. It's the guys like you heard Kamari Lassiter yesterday talking about getting kids up and bringing them to film study with them. That's what separates. If Georgia is to three-peat, I think you made a great point there, Connor. It's happening right now. It's not going to happen on the field in September, October, November. Yes, the team will get better. Yes, there is a long runway for improvement with a relatively soft schedule. Thank you, SEC, for canceling the Oklahoma game. But when the championship gets won is based on how these guys are preparing right now and the level of accountability that they have to one another, not just the coaches, not just doing it because I have to, but doing it because they understand that's the Georgia way. And I've heard a lot of that talk. And again, actions mean more than words, and Kirby Smart tells his players that. But I really believe, and I've really felt that vibe. And again, it's inescapable that the offseason tragedy has carried in. It is now a part of the team identity. There is a picture of Devin Willock in the offensive line meeting room. Do it for Dev is very real, and it's not words. It's effort. It's a different standard. And I think that's what we're seeing here. So while I hear Kirby on the microphone, there doesn't seem to be as many jokes. It seems to be a little more pointed, direct. This team strikes me as very businesslike, recognizing the challenge. Connor, they can't say nobody believes in us. They can't say we're underrated and we're the underdog. They have to find a different collective why. And I guess I would ask you, if you were Kirby Smart and you were trying to motivate a two-time national championship team and that they don't respect his card is out the window, where are you going with it?
Do you know the last time there was a three-peat national champion in college football?
Yeah, like 1935, 34, 33, Minnesota, right?
Yeah, Minnesota in the 1930s. Go be legendary. Go be historic. Go do something that's never been done before. Look, this Georgia team, public doubt fueled them very much a year ago. It's not going to be the case this time around. They returned too much from last year's team. Brock Bowers is back, and I think he's going to be one of the best players in the country. Probably going to have the best offensive line in the country. I think this defensive line is going to be very special this season. And the phrase we've heard so far from this Georgia team is eat off the floor. Kirby said it after the national championship game. You had multiple guys talk about it already in player interviews and sort of what that means. They're not discussing what food they're going to be eating off the floor, but though I do intend to find out what food they would prefer to eat off the floor at some point. But ultimately, keeping that hunger, that desire, I think, three-peats are so difficult, not just in college football. There's a reason we haven't seen it done in the modern era. But in other sports, go watch the Last Dance documentary and see the physical toll that took on those Bulls teams, both physically and mentally there. And the big difference, when the Lakers did it in the early 2000s or, the Bulls, et cetera, the mental toll that being at that level for so long takes on you can be exhausting. There's a reason the New England Patriots never won 3 straight Super Bowl titles. There's a reason the Golden State Warriors couldn't win 3 straight championships. It is really hard to be at that mountaintop for so long. And look, teams are going to be trying to trip you up. The road game at Tennessee is obviously going to be interesting this year. There's probably going to play a really good team in the SEC championship game. We saw last year against Ohio State just how razor thin the margins are between winning a national championship and losing in a college football playoff semifinal. And so Georgia knows that it's going to be really, really difficult this year, more so than last year, to win another national title, and they're embracing it. They're not running from it, and they know that this is a terrible cliche, but it is a marathon. It is a long runway they're going to have to getting that point. So they got to start doing the things now that are going to help prepare them come December, come late November, come November 18th, come December 3rd, when those big games are being played, because ultimately, the difference, the work that they put in now over the spring, over the summer, is going to show up at the end of the season.
No doubt. And you're right about, the go be legendary, go do something that hasn't been done. One thing that's different in college, obviously, is the personnel turns over. And even with Kirby, the coaching staff turnover, like I was excited. I still am thrilled that he added the former Clemson offensive coordinator and Texas A&M offensive coordinator, Dickey. I mean, this is just so brilliant on Kirby's part to bring this institutional knowledge in. And, talking with Terry Robisky the other night, the 38-year NFL veteran that coached on 8 different NFL teams, and this, Connor, from other places you've worked and places I've worked, we bring our best ideas from other institutions, and you don't necessarily change the brand or take it over, but you find a way to work in those good ideas, or you find different ways to maybe, as Kirby says, if it ain't broke, find a way to make it better. And now that some of the Georgia institutional knowledge, by the way, is out the door. Buster Faulkner brought the playbook with him to Georgia Tech. Not like, that's going to make a difference in the outcome, although Tech was playing Georgia pretty tough the first half last year. But the point is that this Georgia football program and the way Kirby does things is constantly evolving. The talent is constantly changing. One of the motivations last year that I thought was interesting was Kirby said, you know what? A lot of these guys were on the team, but they didn't really do it, because there was 15 NFL draft picks, right? So there were a lot of shoes to fill. I think you and I would probably say maybe 10 to 12 guys get picked this year. So there's some of that, but maybe not, certainly not to the extent there was after 2021. This team does feel like it has a little bit more of a understanding of what it's going to take. I've been impressed with the maturity, listening to the guys that we've heard speak so far, the way they've carried themselves. I mean, there's certainly no naivety. It does seem businesslike. Somewhere along the way, these guys are going to find their why. Somebody's going to say the wrong thing about, I can almost guarantee it. Somebody will say the wrong thing about Georgia. Somebody will undersell them like they did last year when the College Football Playoff Committee did Kirby Smart the biggest favor that he ever could have asked for and made them number 3 in those original. I mean, I just think back and I just laugh about it. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Kirby couldn't have paid these people to do a bigger favor than make Tennessee number 1 the week they were going to play him in Sanford Stadium. And then, oh, by the way, Eric Ainge, thank you card for talking about the Sanford Stadium isn't loud. I mean, somewhere along the line, somebody's going to do something stupid. It's rarely Georgia that beats themselves. Kirby and his team is very smart about how they approach things. So while I agree with you that the speech should be, let's be legends, let's do something that hasn't been done almost 100 years, I do believe there will be some external motivation along the way. Question for you, though, Connor. They lose Jack Podlesny. We don't talk a lot about the kicker. We've just kind of taken that position for granted the last 7 or 8 years between Blankenship and Podlesny. Any concerns about the place kicking duties this year?
Yeah, we haven't seen a whole lot from Jared Zirkle. I know Peyton Woodring is going to come in this offseason, and I think he's going to compete for that job. And if I had to make a bold prediction, I think the freshman is ultimately going to end up winning that job. I think, special teams, look, not only did they lose their starting kicker, but they also lose their starting placeholder in Stetson Bennett. They're going to try and get Brett Thorson in a place where he can do that. We didn't see Brett a whole lot last year, only 36 punts. If the offense takes a slight step back and he has to be used more, what does that look like there? Georgia has long had excellent special teams, but I don't know if they've gone into a year with more questions. I guess maybe 2020 when Jake Camarda was still maybe, not the Jake Camarda that we knew at the end of his career. And then obviously they were having to replace Rodrigo Blankenship, but it's hard to imagine them having more questions on the special teams units than they have right now. Before we wrap up and get out of here, they're maybe about a third of the way through spring practice. Obviously, G-Day, April 15th. What are you looking to see? What do you ultimately expect? What do you want to see out of this Georgia team for the rest of spring practice?
Yeah, well, number one, I want them to stay healthy. And so far, knock on wood, it's been a very healthy spring. I think Kirby said there was only 4 guys. It seemed like last year there was a laundry list of guys that had off-season surgeries and so much work to be done. I hope that Mike Bobo can get settled in and find the offensive identity from these players, can find out what they can and cannot do, to the extent of how much are you going to throw to the tight ends, how much are you going to throw to the backs. You mentioned Ladd playing slot the other day. Who's going to be the X, who's going to be the Z. Those questions. Ra Thomas, is he or isn't he? I mean, I've got real questions about him, Connor. I've got real questions if he's really going to be the X. I'm not so sure that Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint or someone else might not take that spot. He's off to a shaky start. Granted, we've seen a very small window, but there seems to be quite a difference between him and Lovett in terms of preparedness so far, at least. Plenty of time left. But I want the offensive identity. I hope and this is something we won't see. It's not like they're going to get on the phone and tell us and encourage me, oh, yeah, guys, I got it figured out. Here's what we're going to do. As far as the quarterback race, listen, Brock Vandervis, he's not going anywhere, no matter what. He's going to graduate from Georgia. He's going to be on the team this fall. I don't know what stupid people are going on TV saying he's transferring. That ain't happening regardless of where he's at on the depth chart. He will graduate from Georgia and be with the team this season. Now, if Georgia were to make him the number one, then Carson Beck might fly off somewhere else. But I don't think they're going to do that. I think we're going to see the same 1-2-3 rotation all the way through. Beck, Vandegrift, Stockton. That's all they're going to show. That's the cards they've shown us so far. And to your point, Connor, I expect that to be the way the season starts. Not necessarily the way the season ends. One thing I'll say about Beck and Vandegrift and Stockton, we don't know how durable these guys are. One thing that a lot of people overlook with Stetson Bennett, he is a tough little nut. He took some shots, man, and he got up and kept going and going and going. Durability, incredible durability from Stetson Bennett. I think he played through an injury last year. I don't know how many hits Beck can take or Vandegrift can take or Stockton can take. I don't know that they get back up without taking their helmet off and going to the sideline for a play. So there is a lot to be determined. And like you said, things that we may not learn until after the season's underway.
Yeah, and if I could single out one player here, we probably should have talked more about these guys earlier. It's that offensive line and Ernest Green. I think there was a lot of excitement around Ernest Green. You've heard what Warren McClendon and Broderick Jones have both had to say about him. Austin Blaske is just a better football player than he is right now. And Blaske is a guy that's played a lot of snaps for Georgia, is going to play a lot of snaps, and is going to be a valuable piece for this Georgia offensive line this season. And I think one of the questions, how much ground can Green make up this spring? Because that left tackle battle isn't going to be solved in spring. And again, I think that's going to go probably into the edge of fall camp there, and they'll probably have a starter for that game against UT Martin. How much ground is Ernest Green able to make up? Because he's coming off back surgery. He's working his way back into great shape. And having said all that about Blaske and where Blaske is and where Green is, Ernest Green was really impressive when we got to see him last spring, and we didn't get to see him continue to develop in the fall. But if he's able to get his body right and he's able to pick things up quickly, he could make that left tackle competition very, very interesting and ultimately find a way onto the field for Georgia in a meaningful way to back up what Broderick Jones, what Warren McClendon have said. And if you're able to have Green and Mims as your two bookends, you're going to feel very good about who you have back there at quarterback, because I think you're going to once again have one of the best offensive lines in all of college football. And so we'll leave it there at that. Mike Griffith, myself, filling in for Brandon Adams this morning. Obviously, if you follow DawgNation regularly, you know where he is at. Sending well wishes to him and his family. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You're going to have Jeff Sintel on Before the Hedges later tonight, and then Brandon Adams will be back with you guys tomorrow morning, 1st and 15 on the DawgNation homepage at 9:45, and then 10 a.m. everywhere else. He's not staying up that late. My name is Connor Riley from Mike Griffith. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been a special DawgNation presentation talking about spring practice and what we've learned so far.